Good evening, everyone, and thanks to everyone for joining us in person and online. I'm Sandra Whitehead. I am the director of the Sustainable Urban Planning Program here at George Washington University. We really appreciate you all joining us to celebrate our fall graduate, Katie Anderson, who will be sharing her capstone with us tonight, and for our alumni panel to talk about their capstone experience. I'm really appreciative of our alumni who have joined us here for the panel tonight: Becca Garman, Sam Maglino, Raven Nee, and Christian Maldonado. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
Testing. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. So tonight I will be presenting on affordable housing development. In particular, I have looked at 3 models for affordable housing development: the private developer model, the nonprofit model, and the public-private partnership model. And for each model, I looked at 3 case studies to compare the effectiveness of each approach. So before getting into the details of my research, I want to touch on why I chose to look into this topic in the first place. And that is the lack of affordable housing throughout many cities in the US today. This is largely due to a diverging relationship between rent prices and household incomes throughout metropolitan regions. And as we can see in the graph here on the left, the median rent for newly leased units rose 32% between December 2017 and September 2022, with nearly all increases occurring in 2021 and 2022. And these rent increases are happening for a variety of reasons. In particular, they're really due to private developers' continued efforts to build or rehabilitate existing or naturally occurring affordable units for upper income households in order to satisfy their desired profit margins. And there's many examples of this that I have come across throughout my research. Just to touch on one, in Atlanta, Georgia, it's estimated that over 9,000 residents were displaced between 2010 and 2017. For example, there was a 154-unit apartment complex in South Atlanta that was demolished for a new 1,100-unit condo and apartment building with rent prices more than double those in the original building. So while they increased the overall units available at the site, it became very much unaffordable for the tenants that originally lived there. So therefore, this distinction must be made between a housing shortage and an affordable housing shortage. As many American cities, housing crises is more an issue of price and affordability rather than supply. So I started this project by really asking myself, is there a feasible way to develop affordable housing developments that provides high quality housing to low income households, along with other environmental, social, and economic impacts? In particular, I'm looking at housing that's financed through the federal low-income housing tax credit, which I'll go into a little bit more detail on in the following slide, and comparing the development outcomes when undertaken by 3 models. Again, the private developer model, the nonprofit model, and the public-private partnership model. And through research and analysis, my goal was to really uncover the effectiveness along with the strengths and weaknesses of each approach, seeking innovative solutions to enhance the overall impact of affordable housing in urban landscapes. So again, in order to keep the case studies I looked at somewhat uniform in their finance structures, I examined projects that were financed via the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, or the LIHTC, which is a federally funded tax incentive program administered by the states to encourage the construction and preservation of affordable rental housing by helping developers offset the development costs. And while some requirements for LIHTC development are standardized nationally, such as requirements for affordability, the states are really encouraged to distribute credits that most effectively meet their local housing needs and goals through their qualified allocation plans, or QAP. And in the QAP, states outline their housing goals, special populations or geographies that will be given preference, and how points will be rewarded for LIHTC through the application process. And the criteria for states' QAPs are generally encoded in three main scoring opportunities, being thresholds, which are the minimum requirements for developers, and then they have set-asides and competitive points. And the image on the left you see here is just a snapshot of Washington, D.C.'s threshold eligibility requirements as outlined in their qualified allocation plan. And as you can see, there are a variety of criteria that DC requires for affordable housing developments, such as green building design and construction, project certifications, and certain development reviews. My research also included a literature review in order to identify 3 success parameters to measure the effectiveness of each model's case studies. The first success parameter I outlined is the promotion of mixed income housing or communities. And this broadly refers to residential settings in which housing is affordable to varying income levels. And according to the Urban Institute, the goals and purposes of mixed income communities is poverty alleviation, desegregation, and urban revitalization by bringing public and private investment into disinvested neighborhoods. And this is important because the lack of public and private investment in low income and minority neighborhoods really can undermine the residents' access to health promoting amenities and services, job opportunities, and quality schools, just to name a few. Additionally, in gentrifying neighborhoods, mixed income housing can really sustain and provide affordable housing opportunities for the lowest income households that are at risk of being displaced due to rising rent prices. My second success parameter that I outlined here are place-based priorities and initiatives, which seek to strengthen the physical, social, structural, and economic conditions that affect the well-being of families and individuals who live there. And these strategies include efforts to enhance the quality of life and the livability in a community through local solutions that address employment opportunities, or housing conditions or availability, health or environmental concerns and hazards, or poor or fragmented service provisions. And lastly, my third success parameter is energy efficient and green building design. And this really has many benefits when incorporated into affordable housing development, such as decreasing the carbon emissions of a city, alleviating the energy burden faced by low-income residents, as well as preserving the affordability of the building. And according to the EPA, lower-income households experience higher energy burdens for 2 main reasons. First being the percentage of income used to pay for energy generally declines as income increases. And second is that outdated equipment or poor housing quality can lead to higher than average energy use and cost. And the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy estimated that about 35% of the energy cost burden faced by low-income households could be alleviated if affordable housing were brought up to the efficiency standard of the average US home. So incorporating energy efficient design really provides economic benefits to the residents, as well as health and environmental benefits by decreasing the carbon emissions of the city's housing stock. So overall, these 3 success parameters, I think really are used to prove a model's social, environmental, and economic benefits to residents of affordable housing development, as well as for the community as a whole. Now jumping right into my case studies. These are the 3 case studies I looked at for the private developer model. The first one is Banner Lane in Washington, D.C., 810 River Avenue in New York City, and the Barcroft Apartments in Arlington. Now, I won't be going into too much extensive detail on each individual case study, but I will be touching on some aspects as they pertain to the success parameters. I also wanted to make note that my research did take a bit of a turn when trying to find a case study by private developers in Arlington, Virginia. They, as I found out, do not seek out low-income housing tax credits for affordable housing as much as their nonprofit counterparts, as the nonprofits that really dominate this space in Arlington are APA, AHC, and Wesley Housing. And to find out why, I spoke to a couple individuals, including Jill Norcross, the executive director of the Northern Arlington Affordable Housing Alliance. And she told me that APA, AHC, and Wesley Housing are really homegrown in Arlington. So according to Jill, partnering with them has become this historic practice of the county, and really creating this long-standing partnership. I also did some additional research to further try to understand this phenomenon. And what I found is that Arlington also has a really unique inclusionary zoning program, which allows the developers to buy out if they do not wish to provide the affordable units. And according to Michelle Crocker of the Virginia Housing Alliance, this unfortunately happens very often. But the upside is that all this money fuels the county's housing trust fund, which does provide gap financing for the nonprofit developers to do 100% affordable. So while for-profit case studies in Arlington were difficult to come by, there was one that I came across that is currently in the works. But because the project is still in its early stages, the LIHTC allocation is not yet decided. But Barcroft was the largest remaining naturally occurring affordable housing community in Arlington, and it stood at risk of being sold to market rate developers. However, J.R. Lynch's investment in the property in partnership with Arlington County and the Amazon Housing Equity Fund is intended to ensure that the affordability will remain in place and that displacement does not occur as a result of this investment. However, local nonprofits and residents are not quite convinced that this will be the case. In particular, the Asian American Pacific Islander Civic Engagement Collaborative, or ACE, says that displacement is inevitable here because the rents that the residents are currently paying are lower than the dedicated affordable rates that they will rise to. And this is because the rates will be increased by 3% every year, stopping at 60% area median income, while a majority of the longtime tenants of Barcroft that were surveyed make below 60% AMI. So we still have to see how this one plays out. But for right now, the promise of preserving affordability at the site is not looking too hopeful. And in terms of success parameters, none of these 3 case studies achieved energy efficiency or place-based initiatives that went beyond those required by the state or city's QAP. While one of the 3, being Banner Lane in DC, did promote mixed income housing. This is because the project was a redevelopment of the Sursum Corda apartments in DC, and the developer decided that if a resident from Sursum Corda elected to not return once the redevelopment was completed, that unit could either stay as an affordable unit or be converted into a market rate unit. Next up, we have the nonprofit model. And the case studies here I looked at are the Hampshire in Washington, DC, Beverly Place in New York City, and Gilliam Place in Virginia. Again, not to go into too much detail, but I did find that all 3 of these case studies did include some substantial place-based initiatives and priorities. Starting off with the Hampshire, the developer Wesley Housing included place-based priorities and support services for its residents. So within the building, Wesley Housing included a community resource center, which provides host programs focused on education, training, and family programs in order to strengthen the physical and economic conditions of the community. Second, with Beverly Place, which was developed by Community Counseling and Mediation, or CCM, which is a Brooklyn-based behavioral health organization that provides a range of social support, counseling, health, mental health, education, and supportive housing services to at-risk children and families in the Brooklyn area. And the building is home to the on-site offices for CCM support services, where specific service for tenants include caseworkers that assist with creating individual service plans, skills of independent living training, primary care coordination, psychological training, and therapies such as urban roof farming, which takes place on the property's rooftop garden. So by bringing affordable housing together with support services that really help residents establish a self of well-being and placemaking, CCM is really establishing a model for place-based priorities with this project. And lastly, in the nonprofit model, we have Gilliam Place. So in 2012, the Arlington Presbyterian Church, which was on the site that is now home to the Gilliam Place Apartments, approached the Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing, or APA, the Arlington-born nonprofit developer, to create a space that would provide both affordable housing, but also a place of connection for the community. And the major place-based initiative here is that the civic/retail space in the building has been leased to nonprofit group La Cocina for a bilingual culinary job training facility. Additionally, the community room in the building includes uses for resident service programs, which includes educational after-school programs, financial and employment counseling, language skills classes, as well as health and wellness screenings. And lastly, we have the public-private partnership model. Once again, case studies for-profit involvement in affordable housing in Arlington specifically was difficult to come by. The Jordan in Arlington actually was completed through a land swap agreement between private developer JBG and nonprofit AHC. So the two developers initiated a land swap agreement as part of a broader redevelopment proposal for 3 properties in the Ballston neighborhood. So AHC swapped its old Jordan Manor for a portion of JBG's Peck Chevrolet site, where they replaced the aging 24-unit building with a new 100% affordable 90-unit building. And in return, JBG used the site of the old Jordan Manor to build 19 market rate townhomes. So here we have a mixed income community as a result of this partnership. I also wanted to highlight the green building achievements of 425 Grand Concourse in New York. The 24-story building was designed to the Passive House Institute Plus standard, which means that it consumes 30% the energy a conventional housing project would typically consume. The building also includes some really cool features, such as a dashboard for tenants that allows them to review their detailed electrical and cooling energy consumption, in hopes that having this access to their personal consumption data will affect energy consumption behavior. Also, the high performance design elements within the building, in particularly the high quality and airtight envelope component, ensure that the building will remain resilient in extreme weather or extended periods without power. This is especially important in New York, as experience from Superstorm Sandy back in 2012 showed that high-rise buildings are especially vulnerable to prolonged power outages, as most emergency loads only address short-term emergency loads rather than the longer-term loads that are required for sheltering in place. In terms of the place-based priorities, the 3-story base of this building is home to a charter school, a medical facility, and a cultural and community space, including a social services center and a supermarket. So overall, the private developer Trinity Financial and nonprofit MBD Community Housing really celebrate how decarbonized multifamily buildings can be profitable, affordable, and healthy places to live. So now on to the analysis and conclusion part of tonight's presentation. This graph is just kind of visualize of the 3 case studies in each model, how many of them meet the success criteria. And as I touched on earlier with the private developers, 0 out of 3 case studies for private developer projects included green building design or place-based priorities that were beyond the city's requirements as outlined in the QAP. While 1 out of 3 did promote the development of mixed income housing. In terms of the nonprofits, 1 out of 3 projects did include mixed income priorities, while 3 out of 3 included both place-based priorities and green building elements. And finally, with the public-private partnerships, this one really did the best with the mixed income success parameter. As we can see, 2 out of 3 projects did achieve this, and 3 out of 3 included place-based priorities, and 2 out of the 3 having sustainable elements. So for me, the main takeaways from my research were that overall, while affordable housing developed by the nonprofit organizations usually did not include mixed income priorities, they really did emphasize the place-based initiatives as all of them have some type of service or nonprofit within the building to assist residents. And second, the developments done by private developers without the participation of a nonprofit organization really do not achieve energy efficiency and green building design improvements or place-based initiatives that are, again, beyond the requirement of the state or city's QAP. And lastly, once again, private developers in Arlington are really not seeking out the low-income housing tax credits for affordable housing developments, as this space is really dominated by the nonprofits in the area. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much.
Now, excuse me. Now we're going to have some Q&A in the room here, and we will also have some online Q&A. Andrew first, and then Doreen.
Katie, great job. My question involves like office to residential, and have you seen any examples, good examples of affordable housing, and have any of them kind of gone above and beyond those requirements that you discussed?
So I would say office to residential is quite the topic of conversation in a lot of areas. When I worked at the downtown DC bid, that was like a real target of theirs to start converting these empty office spaces into apartments. There are a lot of barriers to this. And with DC, the mayor also recently passed, like, we want to have like X many affordable units. So hopefully we will start seeing that, especially in downtown, as we really start to see these conversions with empty office buildings. But there were no projects that have so far been completed that use LIHTC credits specifically.
Wonderful presentation. My 2 questions are, how are you defining affordable housing? I probably missed that in the beginning as I was coming in. And my second one would be, across your case studies, what incomes have you seen that are the same, that qualifies as affordable? Because I know a lot of low income, like very low, isn't necessarily qualified for the affordable housing that some redevelopments have now, because there are trying to increase the income of that area. So how are they defining that?
Yeah, so with the first part of your question, in each state or city's QAP, when they outline the types of requirements they're looking for and who gets these tax credits, there are specifics for each region, and it usually is a mix within one building. So a lot of the projects I looked at, there's like X amount of units for 30% AMI, X amount for 60% AMI, and so on. So it really is like building dependent, and that's a result of the policies that come with the qualified allocation plans. And sorry, could you remind me the second part of your question?
Across your case studies, what is the average or the range of incomes that qualify as affordable?
Oh, yes. So yeah, so once again, there are like a range of incomes that that are affordable. It usually tops or maxes out at 60% AMI, and there's a mix of units for 60% and below as well.
Great. Thank you. That was a really great presentation. I was curious, in your review of some different state QAPs, if you've seen more states try and incentivize nonprofits or like give more points to nonprofits, like for these reasons, if they typically go above and beyond the baseline.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In each state or city's QAPs, obviously they have the threshold eligibility requirements, and then also for set-asides and competitive points, that involves a wide range of things that for projects that will be awarded extra points. And nonprofit involvement is a set-aside that you almost regularly see in these QAPs, because I mean, it's obvious that, you know, they are willing and want to provide these types of services to the community. So I think these state policymakers really see that, and they want to see their involvement in affordable housing projects. I don't have the exact number of like how many extra points, but there are additional points that are awarded.
We have online questions.
I do have a question from Michael. Did you get an opportunity to ask private developers what drove decisions away from energy efficiency and mixed use development?
Money. Yeah, I did talk to this one man who works at a law firm that specializes in like affordable housing financing. And with a lot of his clients, it's really just getting the funds, because when it comes to the financing aspect of these projects, sure, they receive these tax credits, but the funding comes from a variety of different places, whether it being other state programs, local programs, environmental programs. There's a lot of projects that received some funding from brownfield cleanup programs. Yeah, it really just comes down to where they get the money from.
I got a question from Ann Carroll. In learning about the homegrown nonprofit developers in Arlington, how do you think we can support and strengthen those organizations?
I think they're doing very well right now, and considering they really own every single affordable housing development currently, as opposed to some projects that were probably developed like over 20 years ago. I didn't want to look at super old case studies, but yeah, I think in terms of how to support them, just really, it really comes down to policy, and within the QAP, kind of what is the state looking for and how are they willing to incentivize certain types of projects, especially for like place-based priorities. There are some set-asides in DC's QAP for place-based priorities, for example. And yeah, it really depends on state policies, kind of how they're willing to incentivize these types of projects.
Thank you, Katie. Congratulations on being done. Thank you all for your great questions and participation. And now, I want to invite our alumni panel up. We will get the chairs together and we're going to give you guys mics. Sharing so you can see folks. It's a little weird having it all in the background. Will they be able to see?
Yes, we switched it so they can use it. How do I use this mic and use this one?
Just around this. So, ooh, very loud. Thank you all for coming tonight. This is a special treat for us, and this panel of alumni are really here to talk about capstones and like what their capstone meant to them, but mostly to talk about like how they chose their capstone and what advice they have for students who haven't written their capstone yet. So what I'd like first is for each of you to introduce yourselves, tell us your name and what you did your capstone project on, and how long ago you graduated.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Christian Maldonado. I graduated this last summer, so I just presented before Katie's tonight. That was exciting. And I did my capstone on rethinking the Western ethos, how we imagine desert mid-sized cities and their mindset in building and how we can redefine it for more sustainable means moving forward in the world.
Hello all, my name is Raven Nee and I presented my capstone a year ago exactly, basically. Great job, Katie. And my topic was intersectional zoning. So I was looking at how we can take lessons learned from intersectional feminism and really apply that to urban planning to remediate the inequities we don't realize that we're continuing to perpetuate in the built environment.
Hi, my name is Becca Garman. I graduated in spring 2020, and I finished my capstone in the fall before 19, sorry. It's been a while. I did my capstone on looking at renewable energy and affordable housing developments. I did it as a sort of applied research project for my then employer, who was starting to look at putting on-site solar in a few projects.
Hi, I'm Sam Maglino. I graduated in summer of 2021, and I did my capstone on implementing green infrastructure on Quantico Marine Base as a carry-on through 3 semesters of elective studio course at Quantico.
Yeah, and I think my next question, maybe you can address this one first, Sam, is how'd you choose your topic?
So I a little bit kind of fell into my topic. I definitely wanted to try and build my capstone off of something that I was interested in and something that I had kind of an interest in throughout all of my courses. It kind of took a little bit of a different pathway when I joined the Quantico studio, and we kind of just kept developing a plan for the area that we were using. And it kind of, I guess I picked my topic because I was really interested in climate change resiliency, green infrastructure, how you can use that for stormwater management, help reducing flooding, and help to improve the water quality of existing nearby bodies of water. And so it kind of seemed like a really good place to try and think through how you could integrate design into that area using things that I was already interested in. It definitely kind of put me down a pathway that I thought like maybe I would want to change completely and go into engineering, because green infrastructure and the actual infrastructure component can be really tough to learn, but it was, I don't know, something that I just kind of kept kind of obsessing over, honestly, and was like, I guess this is just really going to be what I have to do. And yeah, that's kind of how I did it. It was a little bit of a roundabout way.
Great. For me, I studied, or for all throughout the program when I was going through, I was really interested in housing affordability and different housing typologies across the spectrum and how those intersected with climate change. And so my capstone came about because I really wanted to look at the intersection of those issues. And I also really wanted to understand the sort of best case or best practices out there for what different affordable housing developers were doing and how it was financed. That was a more technical part of my project, is that I looked at sort of putting together a financing model for one particular project to have on-site solar. And I really wanted to then take my project and present it to my employer and say, here's why we can do this in our projects and across our portfolio. And part of it, I also looked at some community solar models. Yeah, it was sort of just a culmination of a lot of my interest and studies throughout the program.
So mine was a very long burn. Sandra and I, when I was first talking about joining the program and choosing which grad program to go to, we were talking about if I had a more involved idea for my capstone, I could work on it throughout the program and maybe get it published. So I started thinking about it right as soon as I started classes. And I remember being at work, but I was thinking about a newspaper article I saw that really upset me, because basically someone I admired in the community I live in stood up in support of the racial injustices and protests that were happening. And she had to apologize in a formal committee because they misconstrued what she said as she was calling out racist planning practices. And they said that they thought she was referring to them as that way. And so I was just thinking about, but I'm learning all my classes, like we really are perpetuating these inequities and these racist outcomes. So I started looking at how can we evaluate zoning to see what that equity on impact is under historically underserved and discriminated against communities. And it evolved into, I had this anti-racist zoning policy idea, but I really was thinking about how do I approach this from my identity and my background as like a middle income white woman. Anti-racist didn't feel like the exact right way for me to approach this. So that's when I remembered. And I also didn't want it to be just anti-racist. I wanted to be anti-ageist and anti-ableist and anti-xenophobic, et cetera. And I was like, oh, intersectional feminism. That's right. I forgot about that. Let's come back to that. So that felt really right to me. And I literally came upon that vocabulary the week before the semester started. So this was a 2.5-year process for me, at least. But yeah.
So with my capstone, I think I went through 4 different iterations before I really settled on what I wanted to do. So I'm originally from the west coast of the United States, and I moved out here with the intention of trying to think of something we can do differently. Because out there in the desert mid-sized cities where I grew up in the middle of the desert, you can't really continue to build and have urban sprawl and think that you're going to survive, and really try to diversify when you can't. When your community's centered on tourism or gambling, you can't really, attract what you want without it having a future. And so with all our different challenges, looking at, I love transportation, I love land use. And so trying to find this intersection was very difficult. And so I thought, well, let's look at that more deeply and see what structures currently exist. Out west in these smaller pocket cities, I think I defined it something between like 100 to 500,000 people in these cities, right? These small, growing metropolitan areas, to see what we can do differently. So I focused on public transit. There's a psychological component. How can we change people's minds to say, it's okay to take a train. It's okay to trust the bus system that, the city is trying to provide to you, as opposed to taking your car every morning and driving an hour, 30 minutes to work and contributing to, societal destruction. So it did take a while, and I think there's a component where we'll talk about how we got, more into it and what advice we can give to students. But it's a massive challenge, and bringing about. I was pretty aggressive, is what I'm trying to say. So affordable housing, like Katie was talking about, was a major component, and really thinking outside of the box and having the willingness to do something about it rather than saying, I like my car. I'm going to stay home. This is my little world. So,
How long did it take you to write your paper once you settled on your topic?
well, with 4 different iterations, I had started about a year prior, which, with 4 different iterations, I had to kind of run pretty fast. Like a little light jog, turn into like a sprint. So I had a solid 3 months to really get into the nitty gritty of things and really develop the policy initiatives that would create change, as opposed to saying, we need affordable housing. Well, what does that mean? How do we define affordable housing? So on and so forth, especially in communities like desert mid-sized communities that like low density. Let's not ruin the scenery of our mountains, but we're going to pay $1,400 in rent for a studio. Doesn't really make sense, right? So it did. I rushed it a little bit towards the end, but we made it. So.
And Raven, you kind of talked about the slow burn. Like we started talking about your capstone before you committed to the program.
Yeah.
Right?
So
Like, I think you're the person who thought about yours the longest.
probably. And I think even though I didn't know until that very last week and semester exactly my topic, my background in undergrad was environmental studies, which is very interdisciplinary. And I felt like as I moved through the program, I was very focused on the interdisciplinary nature of planning and planning practice, and really focused on equity and justice. And that was kind of, if I had to say I had a track, that was my track, was looking at, as we love to call them in our program, the Jedi principles. So the actual writing, I did a lot of kind of reflection in small pieces throughout the program, but also like on specifically capstone ideas and what I was thinking through, and choosing books and classes that I thought would support these ideas. So writing was happening the whole time. Both Sandra and my second reader would argue that all the writing happened in the last week, just based on how organized and put together it was. And so I'm very motivated by pressure, and it all came together in the last week.
Mine took, I only worked on my capstone for a semester. I think when I was going through the program, there was a little less structure around it. And so I was back and forth between 2 topics and landed on my topic sort of midway through the semester and worked on it. But I will say, likewise, like it was issues that I'd been thinking about my whole while I was going through the program. It was based on research and conversations I had, through the program and also in my professional life. And so it was a long time coming, but I definitely wrote it in probably a month.
But I think you'd been thinking about it at least for.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
That's the thing.
Honestly, I don't really know. I feel like the first week of class, everyone was like, all right, start thinking about your capstone topics. And I felt super duper out of place because I was like, I didn't even realize that I was supposed to start thinking about that yet. And so I kind of went through a lot of different, like, oh, maybe I want to write about this, maybe I want to write about that. And then, when I joined the studio, that was when I was like, well, I guess we could do it like I could make my capstone off of this, but that wasn't really until we had pitched that idea.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that was
That was the fall, right? And then you wrote yours in the summer.
Yeah. So in the springtime, we were kind of thinking about what we might want to evolve that into. So I think honestly, I did a lot of renderings in my capstone for like, what this could look like in this area. So I spent a lot of time doing that and figuring that out. I wish I had spent more time learning how to do that in GIS. For anybody who's against it, you should really learn it. It's a really good tool. But that part took me a while. I think actually writing it out and figuring out how I'm going to articulate what I think should be a plan or how to implement it, I think that took me probably the entire summer semester, and then like staying up until like 3 a.m. every day because I just couldn't figure it out. I spent a lot of time really getting out of scope with what my capstone was, especially like oh, how do you implement a nature-based solution? Getting into like, okay, so what is the soil type and how fast is the water infiltrating the soil? And a lot of things that I would help the research, but didn't necessarily need for my capstone. So that probably ate up a ton of my time that I could have spent sleeping or thinking a little bit more critically about it. But it it reached the finish line, and it was a fun product, and I learned to make a lot of good renderings and use EPA tools that now I get to use as well.
And what resulted from your capstone? What happened to you after that?
So from the capstone project, I got a job at Marine Base Quantico doing community planning for them and being a facility planner on the Marine Base for about 18 months. And then I moved over to EPA, where I get to do more infrastructure planning for climate change resilience.
What advice would you guys give to people who are where you were before, right? People who are like, what am I going to write my capstone on? How should I think about this? And to Becca's point, the capstone has a lot more structure around it now than it did in 2019. That was my first year as director. And I was like, oh, we need to make this more robust and more transparent to students, right? About how to do this. And this panel is part of that process. We want to make this open. We want people to understand what a capstone is and how you go about it from the get-go. So what advice would you guys give our audience?
Pick a topic that interests you. I think there's a lot of topics that are like, this is a hot topic, like climate change. But if that's not something that interests you, it's going to be a not fun experience for you to just keep reading about things that bore you to tears. So that would be because then you stay motivated to work on it and you get a little bit more knowledge hungry about what you're researching, and it gets a lot of other ideas flowing for you. So that would be my advice.
Yes, I agree with all of that. I would also advise that you think about what you want to do with it. I think that you've heard from a lot of us. We were like really thinking about these issues all throughout our program. They were meaningful to us, and I think that when I was going through, my advisor said, like, at the end of this, what do you want from it? Do you want to present to your employer? Do you want to like publish in Greater Washington? Like, I think that was helpful for me to, as I was going through that exercise of thinking about how can I, because I really wanted to do applied research, like how can I take this information and write it in such a way that it can be used or thought about by not just me and my advisor that's reading it. And so I would recommend think about that.
I definitely want to echo what they both said. Find something that like lights you on fire, that you're passionate about, that you're going to be willing to stay up till 3 a.m. looking at. And I just want to say, I remember Sam's presentation, and she had very, very specific numbers, and I was really blown away by it. So I was always like, wow, that looks so practical. But I also want to say it's okay for your topic to change, and that's kind of part of it because it's part of the refining process. It's part of the critical thinking. So, and that going like hand in hand with that is that you will be stressed, but almost everyone is stressed. So that's part of the process too. But if you feel like you don't know what you're doing, other people seem like they do, just talk to each other because everyone is a little bit worried about it. And I recommend right now creating a Google Drive folder or wherever you like to keep your notes and ideas. And kind of anytime I was in class and a professor or student brought up something that was really interesting to me, I would just write it down right then because I'm not going to remember it later. But then sometimes looking over your notes would be like, oh, I remember I had these ideas. Maybe I could combine them or just make you think of something else. So kind of like a reflection process. And even if like one of my classmates didn't have data, she like tried so hard and she was freaking out because the data set wasn't available for what she was doing. And I was telling her, you're going to still be able to do this topic and this project. It's not going to be the data analysis you wanted to do. So just even if you can't find something, there's a way to work around it and just be really communicative with your professors because they're going to help you problem solve that part and you can still keep your main core ideas.
I too will echo, just because it's so true. So I started a year, my timeline started a year before I had to crunch time. And I'm a visual learner. So I first started with writing out, literally physically writing out ideas, which transitioned to a Jamboard, which is a brilliant Google product that is available to GW students. And you can color code different notepads and have different panels, so on and so forth. And so it just kind of filled up. And that's how those 4 iterations started. Start and die, and
We
towards
spent a
the-
lot of time with that jam.
we did. And it was fun because then you could see the progress and like what really made sense and in my capstone specifically, challenges and incentives that we can go off of to be aggressive and have a feasible approach as opposed to saying we need this. But with that, the Jamboard was super helpful. And towards the end, when I found that passion, it was almost like, yes, I will consent to staying up to 3 a.m. Yes, I will consent to doing every little piece I can to make sure that I can produce a product that I do want to present after the program. And we have, there's Antonella Salmoron, who's in our audience, who her and I presented at a conference recently. AP has reached out to me. There's others here, they've reached out to us. We get jobs from it. It doesn't have to stop in our program. You can just continue and go above and beyond. So be patient. It's stressful. Grad school is stressful. That's, we have to go through it, but definitely worth it.
Well, that is the end of my formal questions, but I'm going to tack one on that I didn't share with them ahead of time. What was the hardest thing about your capstone?
Time management. You really need to be disciplined. So like I was just talking about, towards the end, at least I got it down. I was juggling 6 million things too, as most of you are aware. And developing that passion, it's almost like, this growth curve, it just exponentially went up and I was able to really manage my time well. And, you have to start that from the beginning. And if you don't, you're going to struggle a little more than you have to. And so reach out to your support system and communicate, whether it's with our professors, family, friends, whoever you can, to develop that structure. That I think made a significant difference, especially if you're juggling like 12 things, because that's what I was doing.
I think Katie would echo that one about your support system. She is a great one.
So I laugh at you, Christian, because you're probably the best at time management of anyone I know in the world right now. Definitely a good idea, because it's really hard to keep yourself accountable when it's a big, overwhelming, abstract project. It worked out that 2 of my classmates also had like flexible schedules without regular business hour jobs. So we met Mondays for 2 hours a week, and 2 of us joked every week that we got the most work done in those 2 hours than we did the entire week combined. So finding that part, definitely finding the time to not get overwhelmed was really, really challenging. I want to say being alone with your thoughts too with it, like this is like, it was hard to think through how I should do certain things. So making this a piece of advice to talk out loud to people, because every time I did, I was like, oh, aha, I got that. Thank you. And sometimes people don't even have to say anything, but just processing out loud.
I'd say the hardest part for me was putting guardrails or just like parameters around my idea. And because I just wanted to look at, clean energy policy and affordable housing. And then there were just like so many amazing case studies and I wanted to write about them all and research them all. And there were just so many things that interested me that I went down a rabbit hole. And I think that was helpful for my research process, but I think I ended up editing my paper like 20 pages out of it because my advisor was like, this is not necessary. Be more concise. What are you trying to say here? And so I think like I probably should have outlined is what I should have done. But anyway, that was the hardest part for me.
I'm definitely going to echo that as well. It's really, I feel like planning is so interdisciplinary to a lot of different things that even if you're working in a topic that interests you, there are like 70 tangential ones that are kind of related that are really interesting. And I think that I'm going to echo this again, that like, again, just like really trying to keep focused on what it is that you're trying to achieve with your capstone. And I think at a lot of points in mine, because I wanted to have it be like really technical and data driven, I found myself getting really discouraged when I couldn't figure out engineering because I'm not an engineer. And I think that it really, really helps to kind of just keep coming back to like, what is this actually about? What is the extent of detail that's needed to get the point across, and like what's the bigger picture that you're trying to focus on, because it's very easy to get lost in the details or other things that again interest you.
And I want to echo that advice of having writing partners, right? Samantha was very fortunate that there were 4 of them going through the entire program together, and they bounced ideas off each other, much like Raven was talking about her little group of folks who were studying together. A capstone can be a very lonely process, right? It's the only real individual work you're doing in this program that is just yours in a way, right? I mean, your papers, yes, your individual papers, but this is what you're going to leave behind, right? And really use your network, use your friends, use your relatives, right? Like have them read it. Because if a lay person, someone who didn't study urban planning can understand it, then you've done a good job writing it up. And now I'm going to ask for reverse order on our questions. We'll see if we have questions online for the panel.
What would you recommend advisors and readers do to help students?
Yeah, what's useful to you from an advisor perspective? And I would probably even extend that 2 of the 4 of you had the same advisor, capstone advisor. Sam and Christian both had Eliza. So, kind of, is that sort of like, what do you look for in a capstone mentor kind of thing? What kind of support, maybe?
I think what helped me was working, I feel like this might be kind of an obvious answer, but like working with someone who works in the field that interests me, even if it wasn't necessarily like Eliza she's still with NPS, right? Like she's
at GSA now.
Oh, good for her. Congrats to her. So at the time, she was with NPS, and parks weren't necessarily the thing that I was super interested in, but like green spaces, green design, green infrastructure, things like that are all related to parks. And NPS has a lot of projects that incorporate those kinds of elements into them as well. So having someone who is very familiar with that similar kind of space is really helpful.
I would say that my advisor was Dr. Elizabeth Gearin, and she was amazing. And she, like right off the bat, she was like, okay, what is your, like, she asked me, like, how can I support you? Should we meet like every other week? Should we meet, once a month? Like, how can we work around your schedule? And so she was just made herself available, but also just asked me, like, at me knowing myself, like, how can I support you? And I think just sort of having that conversation up front at the beginning of the process was really helpful, because I knew like when it got closer to submission, I had to be like, hey, actually, I need to meet with you every week. Like, I'm just, I have so many things I need to talk through. And she was there, and that was really great. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's useful to have someone that has expertise in your topic, but I think it's you're like, so I enjoyed having like a reader as well as my advisor, just because they have access to different resources and ideas, or different schools and backgrounds. But I also finding someone that it matches your work style is important, because you need, and at least one of them has to. If your reader maybe doesn't have to, but so you can set up that rapport of how frequently you would like to meet and advocate for what is going to work better for you. But yeah, I think like someone that matches your work style as far as how frequently you want feedback, and just kind of, or just like if they're an external processor like you are, or if you are an external processor, being able to communicate that, or if you're like, I need more like specific deadlines, or just I need more alone time to like think through my ideas, like whatever that space is. Or some people need like don't want to be, you know, micromanaged. So like finding and communicating that point of how you work best.
I'm really centered around structure. And when I started the program, I believe it was that summer, I took a parks class with Professor Voigt, and she happened to work for the GSA, the General Services Administration, while I worked at the downtown DC Business Improvement District. And so our agencies interacted with each other. And so we had this connection, and then we started chatting more. And I realized, you know, I have a massive background in parks and trails. I used to do trail planning back for the city of Reno in 2021. And having that connection really resonated with me. And we were able to talk about the same things on different coasts of the country. And so having that connection really strived with me. And she also has really good structure. So the number one thing was, you know, let's put a one-on-one on our calendar. Let's meet every so often to have this structure and meet these deadlines. And we had an outline, fortunately, at that time. And we didn't meet every deadline. Life happened, whether it was she was on vacation or I was doing other schoolwork. And, you know, you just make up that time and you run with it. And things really, she was super helpful. You know, communication, I think, is the theme for that. Structure, theme, and run with it. It was cool.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, as Raven was saying, and just to clarify, neither Sam nor Becca were required to have a second reader. That is a new requirement in the last 2 years. And the benefit of that is, as Raven was saying, pick your second reader who doesn't necessarily have an expertise in your topic, but who is a resource locator or someone that thinks a little differently than you, so that you can get that other side of the brain feedback. So I think that's really important. So I was Christian's second reader, and I was able to give him different feedback and different resources than Eliza was. So next question from our online. No? Awesome. All right. Do we have questions from the audience in the room?
Ask all of your professors about your capstone topic. Just be like, hey, I'm thinking about this. Any ideas? And all of them on the spot will give you a bunch of resources, and they're probably going to be different than what others did.
And be careful if you ask John Thomas for resources, because he will give you so many, right?
Yeah.
He's great about that. And then,
Thank you. My question is, in terms of scope, how do you know when to stop, and when did you stop?
So that's really kind of comes back to parameters. It was hard. Sandra and Eliza really helped. And at one point, Dalby was one of my second writers too. And so speaking with them and really, you know, nitpicking what resonated with me and really setting, you know, walls and guardrails, saying, no, I can't do this. It's not going to happen, you know. And, you know, maybe that's something I do later in my research beyond grad school. But, you know, for me, I had that support system telling me, you know, let's look at it this angle, and is this more feasible to implement in desert mid-sized cities versus, you know, LA or some bigger city that it might be more possible in.
That was something that Sandra and I workshopped a lot, because my topic, if you Googled it, nothing really came up. So I felt like it needed a lot of background to kind of justify it and kind of situate it in where it fits in the planning realm. So I think, and we also talked about, I didn't technically do a literature review, but what I did was kind of context of why does this matter, and then just enough background to give enough definition to how my topic was filling in. I had like 3 kind of like bodies of literature I was pulling from, like land use planning, equity and feminism, and I forget what the third one is right now, but I could definitely look at my paper.
implementation models.
I think so, yeah. So, oh yeah, because that was part of it, is I wanted it to be more leaning towards a toolbox. So where your kind of idea would like fall in the middle of this Venn diagram, and that was a helpful way for me to think, is how do I narrow it enough that it follows in the middle of existing bodies of literature, research, or implementation and practice, and just giving enough context to set that up. But I'm a wordy person. It's actually shocking my capstone was not longer.
Well, it was to begin with.
Right, yes. It could have been a lot. You should have seen my undergrad capstone. That was a monster.
For me, we upfront, because we didn't have the presentation, my advisor and I talked a lot about like who is our audience or who is my audience for this project. And that sort of knowing that upfront sort of helped me set in my mind like how long I wanted it to be. And I sort of worked my way back from there. So a pretty basic answer, but we actually kind of set like a page limit because I wanted it to be read by my employer. So it needed to be more of like a technical report. And also knowing my audience, then I also didn't do like necessarily a huge literature review, but I did do a lot of context setting. And so to help then guide the more technical parts of the report. So yeah, I would say actually we set a page limit.
I think what helped me for mine was that I used a lot of screening tools that even if that are basically meant a lot to help other organizations get grants or things, or just kind of figure out what their stormwater is in their area and how to address that. And trying to kind of keep in mind that like this tool only goes so far. So why am I trying to go so much farther than this tool is taking me? And I think keeping in mind like what is like, again, the point of what you're doing and like the overall picture, it kind of helps you to kind of bring it back. But not thinking beyond too much of like, I don't know. I guess sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But just, just staying within like, the tool isn't meant to make all of the water disappear. Like if you're using the EPA stormwater management tool, you're not trying to get all of the water to disappear and figure out all the calculations for that. It's just figure out how big the rain garden needs to be, and someone else will figure out the rest. And kind of keeping in consideration, like, okay, if the tool only goes that far, then maybe I only really need to go that far, but I can explain potentially what the next steps are without having to be an expert in it. And I think that really helped me.
Other questions in the room? Wow, you guys did such a great job of explaining this. Big hand for our alumni panel. And for those of you who are panicking and going, oh no, I need to have a capstone topic now because I'm halfway through the program, and you know who you are in this room, I see your faces. I hope, yes, Andrew, you're one of those people. Think about, right, like what you've heard here tonight and how our alumni have chosen their topic. Also know that there are lots more resources now than there were for poor Becca and Sam when they were doing theirs. There are videos, and there are also the Capstone resources that I've shared with you, but we also have a whole drive, right, that have these great examples of these folks, their capstones, if you wanted to see those, other great examples on a variety of topics. And we also have all of the capstone parameters, because this is the individual culminating experience. We just had our studio final on Wednesday night. This is your culminating group experience, and congratulations to those of you who were participating in that. I see a couple of you here. And your capstone is your individual experience. Your capstone is how we measure whether or not you've mastered the skills, knowledge, and abilities that we try to teach in this program. So thank you again, wonderful alumni panel. Thank you to our guests online, and thank you to our SUPSO board, and especially to Megan and Maddie for setting this up. And that concludes our formal part of our presentation. Sorry, folks online, no cupcakes for you. But thank you all for joining.